Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jonathan Schrago, and I'm the product manager for AI and machine learning at Crisp. Today, I'd like to tell you a story about how we as human beings are being replicated, a little bit about the technologies behind what's causing this, and the impact it's having on the world around us. But in order to segue to this, I should first tell you a little bit about Crisp so that you know why we need to be aware of what's happening. So at Crisp, we protect brands, enterprises, and platforms from threats such as hate speech, fake news, illegal content, activist attacks, and so on. And we do this quite well. We ensure that a threat which appears in digital form is identified early so that the subject of that threat can act on it as soon as possible. The sheer scale of the landscape that we have to cover in order to protect our clients is vast. In order to do this, we have, of course, to look at data, and especially social media data, and a lot of it. And when I say a lot, it doesn't really cover it. A significant proportion of our operations is built to handle the scale of the content we have to analyze. Conducting this analysis requires both human intelligence and automation. Increasingly, this automation has to be smart. It has to be self-learning, and it has to be accurate. In short, our analysts, as smart and as well-trained as they are, scale linearly. Our automation has to help us scale exponentially. For Crisp then, machine learning is less an opportunity than it is an imperative. The ability to train an AI system that learns to detect patterns in images or in text in the same way that humans do, and notionally that would be deep learning, is critical. We have to be able to provide a service that allows our customers to know the presence of risk with enough time to act upon that risk. Deep learning, machine learning, AI, these are tools that we use to identify the signals of risk in the millions of pieces of content we look at. They are scalable and they are intelligent, but ultimately they are just tools. And like any tool, they can be used for good, bad, or the mischievous. And however they are used, in scalably replicating some of the things that we as humans do, they also have the capacity to replace things we do. And where there is the capacity to do something, allied to an incentive, there is inevitability. More and more, the technology around us is not just augmenting, but replacing. In the last 5 to 10 years in particular, this has become ever more apparent. And that is because we have begun to teach computers how to learn like we do. And it's two of these technologies that are of most interest because they are able to replicate the way we look, move, sound, and speak. The first of these is a fascinating thing called a generative adversarial network. Now, generative, that's fairly easy to understand. It generates things. And network, well, we're talking about neural networks, so that's fairly obvious as well. But the really interesting part is the adversarial one. Because the GAN is actually two neural networks pitted against each other in an escalating zero-sum game with the goal of fooling humans. You can see a simple conceptual diagram of a GAN here. The generator's job is to generate an image. The discriminator's job is to discriminate between that image and what it knows of real images, to decide whether the image is fake. Each cycle of training involves this as a loop. If the discriminator correctly identifies the generated image as fake, the generator tries again, and it keeps trying again until it fools the discriminator. At that point, it's now the discriminator which has to evolve. It iterates until it is able to spot the generator's images as false again. Back and forth they go until we end up with something that looks real enough to fool real humans, for the most part. To show the speed that this technology has evolved, here are some generated faces from 2014. And in just 3 years, this is what was produced. And these are not even 2020 technology. For that, we have to look at StyleGAN. Released in 2018 by NVIDIA, the company who manufactures most of the hardware that run the training of deep learning neural networks. The StyleGAN and its successor StyleGAN 2 takes generation to another level entirely. So this video shows two faces generated by StyleGAN 1, and you can see some of the artifacts which show it up as fake. She's got a rather strange eye there, and the symmetry of the teeth on the face on the left. And with enough time looking at these images, you can spot a lot of these artifacts. But these faces were generated with StyleGAN 2. and they are quite compelling. But Stargan 2 isn't just limited to faces. In this video, we can see a world of content. Cars, cats, everybody's favorite, architecture, any number of things, all generated, never before seen. And with Stargan 2, we're also able to age and de-age. We can swap genders. We can generate objects and characters in almost any style. We can even create novel art in an existing artist's style. Right. This is a South African model who goes by the name of Shudu Graham. She's been featured in Vogue Australia and was pictured on the red carpet at the 2019 BAFTA Awards wearing a Swarovski gown. She has 208,000 followers on Instagram, and she's in this presentation, which means she's not real. So we've seen that creating fake faces is well within current technology. But what about animating those faces? No doubt this is a term most of you will have heard. Deepfakes are to video what StyleGAN is to image. What we're able to do is to train a model on someone's face, often with surprisingly little source video, and use that model to change the face on another video. So get an actor saying something your target would never say, then change the actor's face to your target's face, and your target is saying whatever you want them to. That power was unleashed in 2017. It first gained notoriety with this video.
You're absolutely right, Whoopi, that us showing respect for other people, us being thoughtful about other people's traditions.
You can see some artifacts around the neck.
Michelle and I tried to teach our kids.
And possibly a little bit of lifelessness in the eyes.
Over the dinner table.
But it's pretty compelling.
Over the dinner table is, we live it.
And then the technology moved on. We began to replace celebrity faces onto porn actresses. So if we just move to this next video. Only joking. So in the intervening 3 years, deepfakes have improved, but crucially, they've also become cheaper, faster to make, and are now even available to download on the App Store. Given 3 to 5 years into the future, there's no reason to assume that we won't be able to make realistic deepfakes of whoever we want in real time with the devices in our hands. Deepfakes can also have their positive uses. This video is of the president of the BJP in India, Manoj Tiwari. It's from February of this year.
Jai Sri Ram, greetings to all. Friends, I'm here just to ask about the work accounted for.
As you've probably guessed, this video is fake. Here he is again speaking in the Haryanvi dialect of Hindi.
Jai Sri Ram. Dosto, main sirf kaam ka hisab lena aaya hoon.
That video is also fake. And here's the original. It's a powerful way to get your message out. Or maybe you'd like to get the wrong message out.
The market closed today with Apple's stock price at $191.45 per share. Okay. The market closed today with Apple's stock price at $182.25 per share.
That last video was changed merely by changing the transcript of the video. So if you've heard of deepfakes, you've likely heard about efforts made to detect them. Laudable efforts, certainly. Ones financed by some of the largest companies in tech. But there is an inherent problem here. A deepfake detector is little more than a discriminator that works on deepfakes at the moment. In order for that discriminator to be of value, it has to run against the output of existing generators. And every time the output of a generator is tested by a discriminator, it can be improved, circumventing that discriminator. In essence, we will be in an ever-escalating arms race until neither generator nor discriminator are successful more than 50% of the time. Meanwhile, we will have blown well past the point where any human can actually discern the difference. So the obvious response would be to retain your generator until you really want to use it, an election or corporate espionage, say. To be sure that none of your previously unseen fakes can be used to train a discriminator. Of course, there is also the false sense of security that might come from having detectors that work only on fake content you haven't seen. So if your best deepfake detector fails to detect an unseen fake, you'll become all the more convinced of its authenticity. The arms race is not one we appear well placed to compete in. The $1 million deepfake detection challenge on Kaggle attracted more than 2,200 teams and 35,000 detection models. The best of these models was able to detect a deepfake around 60% of the time. And now I'd like to introduce you to Ali Bongo, president of Gabon. He left the country in October of 2018 to seek medical attention in Saudi Arabia, and then later the UK. On December the 9th, the country's vice presidents announced that Ali Bongo had suffered a stroke, but was in, quote, good shape. Here he is, delivering the New Year's address just a few weeks later. 1 week after this video, citing the oddness of it, Gabon's military attempted a coup, the first in that country for over 60 years. It was ultimately unsuccessful, but even to this day, no one actually knows if this video was real or fake. And I thought I'd also show you my favorite deepfake. In 1969, we went to the moon, even though some people might dispute that. At the time, Richard Nixon, the president, was told that there was a decent chance that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin would not make it back off the surface of the moon. In preparation for that, Nixon had a speech written for that eventuality. Armstrong and Aldrin, of course, made it back, but here is the never-made speech anyway, and it looks just like a piece of historical film.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, know that there is no hope for their recovery.
We have the ability to create novel faces. We can animate them and make them say what we want, not what they want. And so we move to the final piece of technology, and arguably the most powerful. So I don't want to get into the weeds about how transformers work. Please check out Fei Wen's presentation from last week. She does a great job of explaining this technology. But the way I think of them is that they are trained on enough example data to start inferring the structure of language. So you could argue that eventually the model will come up with a notion of a noun or a verb or proper sentence structure on top of notions of specific things like dogs. When we use them to make predictions like the next word in a sentence, it can capture the meaning of the sentence structure up until that point to suggest following words that fit in sequence, but also within the context of the rest of the text. Trained transformers gives us models of words, sequences, sentences, and paragraphs. They begin to hone in on the holy grail of text understanding, which is a human level of understanding. So when we pose it a problem like, what category does this collection of text belong to? Its model of text, the categories it is trying to identify, are rich in a level that previous models have been unable to reach. Rather than being statistical models of words, synonyms, sequences, and so on, they're models built on similar structures that we as humans use to understand text. And chief among the transformers is a model called GPT-3, also known as the Generative Pre-trained Transformer, trained by OpenAI, and it is colossal. The first version was released in June of 2018. It had 117 million parameters. GPT-2, 8 months later, had 1.5 billion parameters. And then in May of this year, GPT-3 was released with 175 billion parameters, trained on 45 terabytes of text. It encompasses the entirety of English Wikipedia, yet even that accounts for only 0.6% of its total training data. GPT-3 isn't perfect. Notably, it struggles with middle and high school exam questions. But it's probably worth noting that the level it's being challenged at are middle and high school exam questions, questions posed to teenaged human beings. It might also be worth noting that OpenAI's goal is stated as to advance digital intelligence in the way that is most likely to benefit humanity as a whole, unconstrained by a need to generate financial return. When GPT-2 was first announced, they withheld the release of the full model because they considered it dangerous because of its capacity for misuse. And last week, OpenAI granted an exclusive license to Microsoft for GPT-3. Before talking about what GPT-3 can do, I want to talk a little bit about the Turing test. I'm sure many of you will know what it is, but just to get us on the same page, it was a test first proposed by Alan Turing in 1950, essentially as a means to determine whether a computer can pass as a human. The imitation game, as the test was later called, involves three participants: the tester, who poses questions, a human control who responds through a computer terminal, and the AI which is being tested, and obviously that responds through a terminal. The tester, of course, doesn't know which is which and can interact only by asking questions of the two participants through the terminals. The AI is said to have passed the test if the tester is unable to distinguish between the human and the AI. Now, the Turing test doesn't have a particular formulation in terms of the questions that should be asked, but I did some research into the sorts of questions that might work well. And those of you who remember the Voigt-Kampff test from Blade Runner will have an idea. I even asked some of these questions of GPT-2 and recorded the answer. However, with the advent of GPT-3, the Turing test has become something of a moot point. I don't think we can say that GPT-3 has passed the test, but perhaps it's no longer especially important. We can already create text that fools humans. Essentially, we've shot right under the Turing test. For instance, this article on the Guardian website, or this article that made it to the top of Hacker News with almost nobody questioning its authenticity. GPT-3 understands the language of what it was trained on to such a level it can let you chat with historical figures, create conversations between two people who've never met, replicate your friends as chatbots, make music, create memes, query databases in plain English, autocomplete images, answer medical questions, generate computer code from text descriptions. And my favorite, create fully interactive artificial personas from nothing more than a short description. Entirely fictitious. There are many more things that GPT will be able to do. But there is one thing that GPT-3 does better than anything else. In order to explain what it is, I need to introduce this term. The American philosopher Harry Frankfurt wrote in his book On Bullshit that bullshit is speech intended to persuade without regard for the truth. And that's the critical thing that sets BS apart from truth and lies. Truth has its own motive, veracity, honesty, an honest representation of reality. But lies also has a relationship to truth. It's its inverse. BS, though, it doesn't care about what is truth or lies. Its only intent is to convince. A bullshitter, then, is the greatest risk to truth, even more so than the liar. They are someone freed from the constraints and motivations surrounding either truth or lies, free to explore the entire solution space for what is only the most convincing. And what do we find the most convincing? What we already believe. And this is where GPT-3 excels more than anywhere else. GPT-3 is the greatest bullshitter ever created. As Tristan Harris says, GPT is like a nuclear bomb for trust. And one final quote: bullshit prevents people from being able to distinguish between what is real and what is not. And of course, like every quote, it needs its attribution. So what does all this mean? Well, consider from earlier this year a report into the 2016 election by the Annenberg Public Policy Center in the US. They analyzed 2.8 million tweets from accounts operated by Russia's famed Internet Research Agency between 2015 and 2017. They found that rather than pushing any single agenda around support for Donald Trump or anti-vaxxer viewpoints or BLM, the Internet Research Agency actively amplified both sides. Instead of pushing any given perspective, they were seeking to polarize. Their relationship with truth was neither truth nor lie. All they wanted to do was to further convince each side that they were right, to polarize. And here we are, having created a technology of immeasurable scale, perfectly formed to reinforce our existing beliefs. Imagine an appreciable and undetectable proportion of comments on Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, shared news articles, and so on, generated by an ML model that weaves truth and lies together with the sole purpose to convince the reader. With GPT-3, we already have the capacity. With Russia's IRA, we know that there is incentive. So one could be forgiven for assuming that this reality is an inevitability. Thankfully, we do have one weapon still available to us, and that's human judgment. As great as these technologies are, they are not perfect. And human judgment, and judgment within context, is still capable of discerning, but it does take training. And we're not quite as easily fooled as we might fear we are. Even the Hacker News article had a couple of commenters suggesting that the article was fake. But commensurate with this, our relationship to truth is going to have to change. So if we are able to make indistinguishable videos of whoever we want, saying whatever we want them to say, if we can create compelling text that holds neither to truth nor lies, it seems fairly obvious that the days of us being able to trust what we see and hear from our usual sources are coming to an end. For starters, it will make someone's claim that what actually happened didn't, under the guise of fake news, all the more compelling. If you cannot trust everything you see, hear, or read, then surely the wisest thing is to trust nothing. But then, does this end any hope we have of finding truth? Here's another interesting thought. We haven't really seen deep fakes out in the wild, Ali Bongo aside. I haven't seen any video that gained traction which was later disputed by the person in the video. At least I don't think so. The technology is there, but it doesn't look like it's been used for nefarious purposes yet. Perhaps we'll see zero-day deepfakes in the coming weeks. Perhaps every video we've seen of Joe Biden is actually an actor who's borrowed Joe's face. Maybe last night's debate was actually a marvel of real-time deepfake manipulation. What if we were to create an entirely fictitious persona, have it talk through GPT-4, let's say? Could we reasonably conclude that whatever it said would be immensely convincing to us? Like Manoj Tiwari in India, this persona could speak to everyone, not just in their own language, but their own dialect. They could speak passionately and knowledgeably about their problems, because of course they know all about those data points as well. And even with a face that they find most appealing. An AI of this power surely would convince most of the people they talk to, probably enough to get 50% of the vote in an election. I'm not really sure there's much else to say, other than all hail our robot overlords. Thanks for listening, everyone. Again, if you've got any questions, feel free to stick them in the chat and have a look at them. And Adil, over to you.
Just going to share my screen. Okay, so thanks for that, Jonathan. So now that we all know about the actual technology and what's available and what's possible, let's talk about some of the implications and how businesses can be affected by this in the future. To begin with, this first example is not, it's from a pre-AI world, let's say. It's a case of a false rumor that was spread about Steve Jobs. I'm sure everybody knows of Steve Jobs and how closely associated he was with Apple. The event that I'm talking about here occurred in 2008. It was in October 2008. This false rumor was spread about Steve Jobs that he'd had a heart attack. The result of this was significant, at least for that short period of time when people still believed this. But this was clearly an example of how a rumor can spread, how misleading claims can be used to target specific companies, perhaps for purposes of stock market manipulation. You could use this to easily, in this case, it would have had a negative effect. So it would benefit short sellers or people trying to do what you call a short and distort or a poop and scoop scheme, where you lower the stock price temporarily so you can make a quick profit. It can easily be used, could have easily been used to increase the stock's price, a pump and dump scheme. And those were possibilities that had happened in the past and were remedied relatively quickly and without much fanfare. So In this instance, Apple's stock price did take a 10% hit on the morning of October the 3rd, but very quickly recovered as soon as Apple denied the rumor. Steve Jobs himself was able to deny the rumor. It did result for a short time in an $8 billion market cap loss, so quite significant. But overall, on the day it closed, Apple stock only closed about 2 or 3% down, which is not huge in the grand scheme of things. But in this instance, there was no evidence. It was just a rumor. It was just a collection of words spread on the internet. But what if there was a video? What if we could see this before our eyes? Would it be so easily denied? That's the world we're living in now. So in this instance, this happened in 2019. This was, firstly, I guess, some background on Tesla as a company. I'm sure, well, a lot of people are well aware of the antics of Tesla's CEO, Elon Musk. But as a company, among the investing community, Tesla is, and always has been, it seems, a lightning rod for controversy. For a long time, they didn't actually make any profit. That only started earlier this year or last year. But they've had a skyrocketing share price in recent months, especially. And they've got equal amounts of fervent supporters and short-selling naysayers. Many have described the company as a bit of a cult of personality around Elon Musk, who himself, coincidentally, is actually somebody who has been a harbinger of the impending AI apocalypse that is upon us. But in this instance, in March 2019, an accounts posing as a senior Bloomberg journalist, Macy Kinsley, connected with over 195 people on LinkedIn and followed a large number of Tesla short sellers on Twitter. She was purportedly a Bloomberg journalist covering car cybersecurity, among other things. It's completely bogus. This is a made-up persona. She didn't actually exist. There's some hints of that. You can see that her Twitter account only had one tweet there, one original tweet, aside from retweets. And she didn't have a digital footprint. There was no articles attributed to her. But in the future, we will live in a world where an entire corpus of historical articles could be generated, original articles, at least to the perspective of those reading them. And that makes identifying these bogus individuals significantly more difficult. In 2020, Tesla's share price has rocketed. Elon Musk is well known for these market moving statements that have a significant potential to actually have major financial effects. So one instance of that was on May the 1st of this year, where he actually tweeted that Tesla's stock price is too high. Very strange, especially from the perspective of a CEO. No CEO would readily admit that their company is overvalued, much less tweet it out to the world. As a result of that, Tesla's share price took a $15 billion hit. So far more than even the $8 billion that the fake rumor about Steve Jobs impacted Apple. This was a significant event at the time. Tesla quickly recovered, but Elon Musk is somebody that is known for this kind of behavior and blurs the line between the accepted norms of reality and parody, perhaps. The norms that we associate with reality perhaps no longer hold when you have CEOs and figures who are able to just blithely ignore some of the things that we use to measure reality. So the bar for reality as a result is lower than ever, but the technology that seeks to exploit this is also more sophisticated than ever. There's been numerous examples of this. I think the example of Elon Musk is just especially poignant because he's somebody that has warned against AI and the potential for the dangerous potential of AI. but there's numerous ways that this can be done AI can be used to manipulate companies and individuals. So in the future, deepfakes could be used to lower a company's stock price by generating seemingly credible narratives backed up by credible personas, perhaps fabricating the remarks of these corporate leaders. For example, a bad actor could release a deepfake video that portrays a CEO or any politician, a corporate leader, acknowledging maybe a company's insolvency, perhaps, or committing or confessing to misconduct, or making offensive comments about groups or individuals. All of these things could have significant market-moving events on companies, but whether or not we know these are real events, that's not for certain anymore, especially when reality is so undefined, it seems. Other potential uses, other potential scenarios where AI can be used to manipulate individuals and markets have been identified. These are some of the examples that I've specifically identified here. And there's one example of this that occurred last year where a UK energy company's chief executive was tricked into wiring 200,000 euros to a Hungarian supplier because he believed that his German boss was instructing him to do so. In this instance, it turns out that the call that the British chief executive received was completely generated. It wasn't real. It was done using a voice model of his German boss, and it was completely unrecognizable. In this instance, the boss's identity was stolen. It was a case of identity theft, and it was used to initiate a payment fraud. But this is one prominent example of it, but there's many more potential uses. This is a targeted one, but stock market moving events such as the ones that I've described in the case of Tesla or any other company are real examples that could impact the whole market beyond just individuals. I think that's it from me as far as potential scenarios. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask.
Thanks, Adil. We have one question from Matthew, asking whether there is technology currently available to help identify deepfakes. So sort of. There have been, I mentioned one of the competitions in the presentation by Kaggle, where essentially we're sort of crowdsourcing people's efforts to create discriminators that identify deepfakes. There are a few problems with that. One thing is you need to get hold of a lot of the data. So in this case, it's a lot of existing deepfakes. So images of people that we know are actually generated and fake. But one of the issues, and what I was trying to sort of suggest in the presentation, is that for a given generator, what it creates may look compelling, but typically there will always be a signature in there which shows it as being fake. And so your deepfake generator would essentially learn to spot those differences. And so each time you have a new set of images, there'll be a new set of signatures in there which show that they're fake, which is another opportunity to create a generator that gets around those. As I said in the presentation, the best model in the Kaggle competition was 60%, which is a bit concerning. Really, the best defense we have, I think, is people questioning things. So it's one thing if Boris Johnson was to come onto television and start talking about how important Mao's Red Book is, you might raise an eyebrow, and so it might look real, but then again, the content may well be quite suspect. And I think questioning things like that, so having that sort of human understanding around the context of a piece of content is a good way. I think the most worrying one, and it's similar to the sorts of things that Adil was talking about, was the example where they were able to change the stock price of Apple, say, or somebody conveying what the stock price of Apple was. And that could be that could be really easily done. And if that went viral before people were even able to run it against a deep fake checker, it doesn't really matter if a week down the line they find out that it's fake, if the pump and dump scheme has already gone through. So there's no guaranteed defense against it. Do we have anything else? QA. Oh, here we go. Ian. Quick question more on the technical side of what Crisp does. Do you have any advice for developers wanting to get into this business area who is not exposed to AI or ML projects in their day job? So in terms of actually wanting to get into machine learning and AI, there are, I'll deal with it on that level. So there are a number of courses online, almost anywhere you look. And they're very good courses. They're really interesting primers. However, the most of the ML team at Crisp, I think, is on this, and I can tell you that there is a gap between what somebody like I could learn, and I did. I have a degree in biochemistry. I did quite a lot of maths, and I've done a few courses on machine learning. Obviously, I have to, but the difference between what I know and what somebody who's spent 3 or 4 years or longer doing a master's or a PhD in AI and ML is quite surprising. But these courses do allow you to spend time to understand the basics and understand the principles behind it, and probably also give you a good idea of whether it's something you'd want to spend more time learning about. Alice. Adil, I think is probably for you.
So laws in place to deal with this. There aren't actually. There's even the laws around that are quite lax at the moment. So actually in that case where Elon Musk actually tweeted that Tesla stock price was too high, investors took him to court, and the SEC eventually, the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US eventually ruled that they couldn't prove a distinct link between his tweets and the stock price. It seems absurd on the face of it, but these things are easily manipulated. You can easily manipulate things as a result of that. So there's no way of even identifying them really for the most part. So if it was found to be done in a way that was malicious, in a way that was intended to manipulate for the purposes of any kind of scheme, then if that was identified, then that would clearly be fraudulent. But I think the challenge is identifying it and the sources of it. So these things can be generated by anybody, and they can be put online anonymously. So in reality, I don't think there'd be any way of identifying it, never mind taking it to any court.
And just to add, typically, I mean, the 2 examples you gave, Alice, the damage will be long done before you prove anything. So yeah, eventually you might have your day in court, but it's